People always ask me what 2 decades of loyalty looks like. I'll tell you exactly what it looks like. It looks like transformer oil under your fingernails that never quite washes out, like the metallic taste in your mouth from breathing recycled air for 12-hour shifts, like knowing the difference between a normal hum and a catastrophic failure, just by the way the floor vibrates through your steel-toed boots. My name is Rachel Moore, and I spent 20 years as the Chief Electrical Systems Engineer at Titan Steel Works, a sprawling industrial complex in Ohio that consumes enough electricity every day to power a small city. I wasn't just an employee. I was the central nervous system of a beast that never sleeps, never stops, and never forgives mistakes. The men on the production floor, these weather giants with calloused hands and permanent squints from years of watching molten metal pour, they didn't call the corporate hotline when something felt wrong. They called me. When the frequency changed by half a hertz, when a breaker started clicking in an unfamiliar rhythm, when the backup systems hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, they found Rachel. Because they understood something that spreadsheets and quarterly reports never could. I was the difference between a normal Tuesday and an industrial catastrophe that would make the national news. I was the invisible hand keeping chaos at bay, the quiet guardian who made sure their paychecks cleared and their families stayed fed. The facility itself was my life's work, my child in a way. 60 acres of furnaces, rolling mills, and casting stations, all connected by a spiderweb of electrical systems so complex that the original blueprints were practically archaeological artifacts. I knew every quirk, every flaw, every dangerous shortcut the system took to keep running. I knew that Panel 7 needed its relay tapped 3 times before it would engage properly. I knew that the main cooling system had a temperature drift that the sensors couldn't detect, but I could feel in my bones. I knew that the emergency generator had a synchronization delay that would terrify anyone who actually understood what it meant, but I had learned to work with it, to dance with it, to keep everything spinning in perfect harmony. Then Marcus Whitmore walked through the doors like he owned the place, which technically he did now. He was 34 years old, fresh from business school with a degree that probably cost more than my house, and he had that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having actually built anything with your own hands. His father, Richard Whitmore, had founded Titan Steel 40 years ago, back when men still believed in hard work and keeping promises. Richard knew every worker by name, understood that efficiency meant keeping good people happy, recognized that experience was worth more than any algorithm. But Richard's heart had started giving him warnings his doctors couldn't ignore, so he'd retreated to a beach house in South Carolina, leaving his empire in the hands of a son who thought leadership came from PowerPoint presentations. Marcus wore designer suits that probably required dry cleaning after a single wear, carried a tablet everywhere like it was a sacred text, and smiled with teeth so white they seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. He didn't know a transformer from a transmission line. He couldn't tell you the difference between AC and DC if his inheritance depended on it. But he walked through the facility with this casual arrogance, this unearned certainty that his MBA had prepared him to optimize decades of institutional knowledge into a more profitable configuration. I watched him tour the control center, nodding thoughtfully at equipment he couldn't possibly understand, making notes about things he'd clearly decided were inefficiencies before he'd even asked what they did. The warning signs started appearing about 6 weeks into his reign. He began bringing in consultants, these impossibly young men and women in expensive clothes who'd probably never seen the inside of a real factory before. They carried expensive leather portfolios and spoke in that special language of corporate restructuring, throwing around words like synergy and optimization and streamlining like magical incantations that could somehow transform reality. I watched them circle my department like sharks who'd read about blood in a textbook but had never actually tasted it. They took measurements, asked questions that revealed fundamental misunderstandings about how industrial power systems actually worked, and typed frantically on their devices, probably calculating how much money they could save by eliminating the people who actually kept everything running. One morning, Marcus appeared in the doorway of my control room. He didn't come inside. Nobody ever really wanted to come inside my workspace. I kept it cold, almost uncomfortably cold, because the computer systems that monitored the entire facility needed that temperature to function properly. It smelled like ozone and hot metal and old coffee, and it hummed with a frequency that most people found unsettling. Marcus stood in the doorway like he was afraid the air itself might contaminate his expensive suit. "Rachel," he said, my name sounding strange in his mouth. Too casual, too friendly. "We need to discuss your department's budget allocation." I didn't look up from my monitors immediately. The grid was fluctuating again. The city's power supply was experiencing one of its usual afternoon voltage sags, and I was manually adjusting our capacitor banks to compensate, keeping our internal systems stable while the world outside struggled. It was delicate work, requiring complete attention, the kind of thing that couldn't be interrupted without potential consequences. "Budget allocation," I repeated, my fingers still dancing across the keyboard. "That's an interesting way to say you want to cut costs." "We're reviewing all departments for efficiency opportunities," Marcus continued, consulting his tablet. "Your team seems particularly expensive. 3 assistant engineers, an overtime budget that rivals some of our production divisions, and when I look at these automation metrics, it appears most of your functions could be handled remotely." I finally turned to face him, taking a slow sip of coffee that had been sitting there since 5 in the morning. It tasted like battery acid and disappointment, which felt appropriate for the conversation we were about to have. "Marcus," I said, deliberately dropping any pretense of formality. "Those automation systems you're looking at? I built them 20 years ago. They run on code that doesn't have support anymore, held together with patches and prayers and my personal knowledge of every single failure point in this facility. You're not paying for automation. You're paying for the person who knows which automation to ignore when it's wrong." He actually smirked at me, this condescending little expression that probably worked on people who didn't understand the difference between theory and reality. "That sounds like the kind of job security argument people make when they're afraid of being replaced by better technology, Rachel. We're entering a new era. Efficiency, real-time monitoring, cloud-based solutions." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, that familiar sensation I got when I knew a system was about to fail but couldn't quite convince anyone else of the danger. "You understand what happens if these smelting furnaces lose power for more than 12 minutes? I asked, my voice flat and professional. "The molten steel solidifies. Becomes a 30-ton paperweight. Takes months to repair. Costs millions of dollars. We have backup systems." He waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away an annoying insect. "Redundancies." The consultants reviewed everything. "The backup systems take 9 minutes to fully synchronize without manual intervention," I explained slowly, like I was talking to a child. "The phase alignment drifts. Without someone who knows how to manually override the synchronization protocols, you've got a 3-minute window between safety and catastrophe. And those consultants you hired? They wouldn't know a phase angle if it electrocuted them." Marcus's expression hardened. The friendly veneer cracked just slightly, revealing the arrogance underneath. "I need you to justify your department's existence, Rachel. On paper. With metrics and data. I need a comprehensive report by Friday explaining exactly why we shouldn't move to a more cost-effective solution." I wrote the report. 47 pages of technical documentation detailing every single crisis I'd prevented in the last fiscal year alone. I described the transformer overload in March that would have cascaded into a complete facility shutdown if I hadn't manually rerouted the load distribution. I explained the harmonic resonance event in July that would have destroyed every piece of sensitive equipment in the administrative building if I hadn't isolated the ground fault within 90 seconds. I laid out the mathematics, the physics, the brutal reality of managing industrial-scale electrical systems in aging infrastructure. I made it clear, explicit, undeniable. But I knew he wouldn't read it. Marcus was a skimmer, a headline reader, someone who looked for bullet points and bottom lines. My bottom line was a salary that reflected 2 decades of keeping his inheritance from burning to the ground, and that number, stripped of context, probably looked excessive to someone who'd never prevented a disaster. The atmosphere in the facility changed over the following weeks. It was subtle at first, like a pressure drop before a storm. My team members stopped making eye contact in the hallways. The shift supervisors started speaking in quieter voices. The production floor, usually filled with the confident banter of men who knew their jobs, fell into an uneasy silence. People could sense what was coming. Layoffs have a smell, a feeling, a weight that settles over a workplace like fog rolling in from the ocean. I kept working. I maintained the systems, balanced the loads, kept the beast fed and happy. But I also started making small changes to my personal files. Not the company documentation, nothing that would compromise safety or operations, but my own notes. The little text files where I documented 20 years of tribal knowledge. The shortcuts, the workarounds, the unwritten rules that made everything actually function. I deleted them, one by one, watching years of accumulated wisdom disappear into the digital void. If Marcus wanted lean operations, I'd give him exactly that. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. A calendar notification that simply read, "Organizational restructuring meeting," with no agenda, no context, just a time and a conference room number. I knew what it meant. 20 years of experience teaches you to read between the lines. I put on my cleanest work shirt, made sure my steel-toed boots were polished, and walked through the facility one last time like a condemned prisoner taking a final walk through the yard. I touched the cold metal of the main support beam as I passed, a small goodbye that nobody else would understand. The workers I passed nodded, said their usual greetings, completely unaware that their safety net was about to be removed. I wanted to warn them, to tell them that the storm was coming, but what would be the point? They couldn't stop what was about to happen any more than I could. The conference room wasn't empty. That was my first sign that this wasn't going to be a quiet, professional separation. Marcus had turned my termination into a performance, a demonstration for an audience. Sitting around the polished table were department heads from across the facility, several of those young consultants with their tablets and their ignorance, and the HR director, a woman named Patricia who always looked like she was attending a funeral for someone she'd secretly hated. When I walked in, the quiet conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, and I could read the mixture of pity and relief in their faces. Pity because they knew this was wrong. Relief because it wasn't happening to them. "Rachel," Marcus said from his position at the head of the table, gesturing to an empty chair at the far end like he was offering me a seat at my own execution. "Please sit down." "I'll stand," I said, keeping my voice level. My knees lock up in cheap chairs. A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the room. Patricia looked like she wanted to dissolve into her chair. Marcus's smile tightened at the edges. "As you wish," he said, tapping a key on his laptop. The screen behind him lit up with a presentation slide.
My salary.
My benefits. My team's overtime costs. Every dollar I'd been paid for keeping his facility operational, displayed in cold numbers for everyone to see. It was a violation, a public humiliation designed to justify what came next. "As you can all see," Marcus began, addressing the room rather than me directly, "the electrical oversight department represents a significant operational expense. Our consultants have conducted a thorough analysis, and their conclusion is clear. The current systems can be managed remotely through upgraded monitoring software and a third-party service contract." He looked at me then, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of someone who thought he'd just solved a complicated problem. "Rachel, effective immediately, your position is being eliminated. We're transitioning to a cloud-based monitoring solution that will provide 24/7 coverage at a fraction of the current cost." "Cloud-based," I said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "You're going to manage a 40-year-old industrial facility with cloud-based monitoring. The technology has evolved," one of the consultants interrupted, his voice squeaky with youth and confidence. "Modern systems can handle these operations with minimal human intervention." I laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was harsh and bitter, coming from somewhere deep in my chest where anger and disbelief lived together. The technology hasn't evolved enough to understand that Furnace 3 has a cooling coil with a microscopic crack that creates a feedback loop every time the ambient temperature drops below 40 degrees. The algorithm doesn't know that you have to slowly ramp the voltage on Monday mornings because the city grid does a maintenance switch that causes a surge. Your cloud solution can't feel the difference between normal vibration and catastrophic bearing failure. That's anecdotal evidence, Marcus interrupted sharply. We operate on data, Rachel. Measurable metrics, not superstition and gut feelings. Superstition. I took a step toward the table. Several people actually flinched. I've prevented 3 complete facility shutdowns in the last 8 months alone. I've saved millions of dollars in damaged equipment, lost production, and penalty fees. But sure, let's call that superstition. Enough. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, a theatrical gesture that he'd probably practiced. This isn't a debate. It's a notification. You're terminated. Your access credentials are revoked effective immediately. Security will escort you out. He slid a folder across the polished wood. It stopped a few inches from my hand. Standard severance package. 2 weeks' pay for every year of service, conditional on signing the non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at Marcus. Then I looked around the room at all these people I'd kept safe for 2 decades, and not one of them would meet my eyes. Not one person spoke up. 20 years of preventing disasters they'd never even known about, and I got silence. You think I'm expensive? I asked, my voice dropping low. Marcus, I'm the cheapest insurance policy this facility ever had. You're trading a trained emergency responder for a smoke detector with dead batteries. Get out, Marcus snapped, his face flushing red. You're disrupting this meeting. Don't make me call security. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my access badge. It was worn smooth from 20 years of use, the photo on it showing a younger version of myself, still naive enough to believe that loyalty mattered. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a plastic click that seemed impossibly loud in the silent room. I'll leave, I said calmly. But let me give you one piece of free consulting, since you seem to love consultants so much. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the back of the empty chair. Every eye in the room was on me now, and I could feel the weight of what I was about to say settling into place like a lock clicking shut. The smelting furnaces run on a buffered power supply that needs manual calibration every 4 hours to compensate for grid drift. I performed the last calibration at 6 this morning. It's now 10:30. In approximately 45 minutes, that drift will exceed the safety threshold. Your automated system will attempt to correct it, but it can't because the sensors on Furnace Bay 2 are contaminated with metal dust. I was planning to clean them during my lunch break. Marcus rolled his eyes dramatically. We have maintenance crews, Rachel. This facility doesn't revolve around you. Your maintenance crews repair mechanical systems, I said. They don't touch the electrical controls because they're terrified of them, and rightly so. You have 45 minutes, Marcus. If that drift isn't corrected manually, the safety interlocks will trip. Power to the furnaces will cut. And 12 minutes after that, you'll have 80 tons of solidified steel that will take 6 months and $30 million to repair. Get out. Marcus pointed toward the door, his hand actually shaking. Get out right now. I straightened up, adjusted my collar, and looked him directly in the eyes. Good luck with your efficiency, Marcus. I hope your cloud solution comes with a really good insurance policy. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I could feel their stares burning into my shoulders, but I kept my pace steady, my head high. As I stepped into the hallway, the cool industrial air hit my face, and I smiled. A real smile, terrifying and genuine because I knew something they didn't. I hadn't just quit. I had started a countdown. And the only person who could stop it was walking toward the parking lot, lighting a cigarette, and preparing to watch the consequences of arrogance unfold from a very safe distance. The walk from the administrative building to my truck normally took 6 minutes. I took 15, savoring every step, drinking in the sounds and smells of the facility one last time. Or maybe not the last time. That remained to be seen. The rhythmic pounding of the hydraulic presses echoed across the yard. The hiss of steam from the cooling towers created a constant white noise that I'd learned to sleep through years ago. It was a symphony, and I'd been its conductor for 2 decades. But there was one more stop I needed to make. One final adjustment that would determine whether Marcus learned his lesson or destroyed his inheritance. My truck was parked behind the auxiliary power station, a small concrete building that most people didn't even notice. It looked like a storage shed, completely unremarkable, but inside it housed the manual override controls for the entire facility's electrical grid. Most people had forgotten it existed. The modern systems, the computerized controls, the fancy monitoring equipment, they all lived in the main control room. But this little building held the physical switches, the actual breakers that connected Titan steel to the city's power grid. I still had the key. Marcus had revoked my electronic access badge, sure, but he'd forgotten about the old-fashioned brass key I'd been carrying for 20 years, the one on my personal keyring between my house key and my truck key. He'd forgotten because he'd never actually understood how anything worked. He thought security meant electronic credentials and passwords, not realizing that real infrastructure, the bones of the system, still operated on mechanical locks and physical switches. I unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. The small space was climate-controlled, kept cool by the same systems that cooled the main servers. Red and green indicator lights glowed in the darkness, the only illumination besides the dim emergency lighting. The hum here was different, deeper, more primal. This was the raw feed, 138,000 volts, stepping down to the levels the facility could actually use. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the cool metal of the breaker panel, feeling the vibration of electricity flowing through the system. There was a switch labeled Autosync Override. This was the heart of everything Marcus didn't understand. The automated systems tried to synchronize our facility's electrical frequency with the city's main grid, but the city's power was unstable, constantly fluctuating, dirty, with harmonic distortions and voltage sags. Left to its own devices, the synchronization software would panic every time it detected those fluctuations, interpreting normal grid noise as catastrophic faults. To prevent that, I kept the override switch in manual mode, telling the computers to ignore the minor variations, to trust my judgment instead of their own panic. With that switch in manual, I was the safety net. I watched the numbers, made the adjustments, kept everything stable even when the power grid was dancing all over the place. But if I flipped it to automatic, if I removed that human oversight, the computers would do exactly what they were programmed to do. They'd detect the grid instability, interpret it as a critical failure, and shut down the entire facility to protect the equipment. It wouldn't happen immediately. The monitoring cycle took time, maybe 12 minutes, maybe 15. Just enough time for me to be miles away. Not my problem anymore, I said, putting the truck in gear.
Hey Dani, do me a favor.
For the next hour or so, stay out of the main production building. Use the administrative corridors if you need to get around. Why? He asked, his security instincts kicking in. Just trust me, I said. And Danny? When things start getting weird, remember that I tried to warn them. I drove out of the parking lot at exactly the speed limit, obeying every traffic law, keeping my hands steady on the wheel. I wanted to be far away, completely clear of any potential blame, when the consequences of Marcus's decisions started manifesting. I checked the dashboard clock. 10:45. The monitoring cycle would complete around 11. The error cascade would take another few minutes. By 11:15, maybe 11:20, the facility would be dark, and the clock would start ticking on those furnaces. I lit a cigarette with the truck's lighter, took a deep drag that burned all the way down to my lungs, and tasted like freedom and revenge in equal measures. My phone started buzzing in the cup holder. I glanced at it. Sarah, my assistant, her name flashing on the screen. She was probably in the control room right now, watching the numbers start to drift, seeing the warnings pop up on the monitors, not understanding what they meant or how to fix them. I felt a brief pang of guilt. Sarah was talented, smart, capable. She didn't deserve this. But she also didn't have the knowledge to stop it, and that wasn't her fault. It was Marcus's. I didn't answer. I picked up the phone, held it for a moment, and then powered it completely off. Whatever was about to happen, I needed to be unreachable. I needed to be the ghost they couldn't summon, the safety net they'd cut away and suddenly desperately needed back. I merged onto the highway, heading away from the facility. In my rearview mirror, I could see the massive buildings growing smaller, the smokestacks pumping their normal clouds of steam into the blue sky. It looked peaceful, normal, productive. But I knew that underneath that calm exterior, The systems were starting to fail. The computers were detecting problems they couldn't solve, initiating safety protocols that would cascade into complete shutdown, starting a countdown that would cost Marcus everything his father had built. "You got about 20 minutes, I said to my reflection in the mirror. "Better start learning humility real fast." I turned up the radio. Tom Petty was playing Free Fallon. I sang along, my voice rough from 20 years of cigarette smoke and swallowed complaints. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't the one falling. I was the one who'd just let go of the rope. I didn't drive home. Home was too quiet, too empty, too much space for doubt to creep in. Instead, I pulled into Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar about 8 miles from the facility. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions, where the beer was cold and cheap, and the bartender had seen enough of life to know when to talk and when to pour in silence. At 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, the place was nearly empty. Just me, a man who looked like he'd been living in his car since the 90s, and Martha, the bartender, a woman with gray hair piled high and eyes that had witnessed decades of human weakness. "Bit early for the hard stuff, Rachel," Martha said, her voice carrying the rasp of a lifetime smoker. "I'm celebrating," I said, settling onto a bar stool that had probably been there since before I was born. "Celebrating what?" She pulled a glass from beneath the counter. "Freedom," I replied. "Whiskey and beer. Keep them coming." Martha raised a penciled eyebrow but poured without judgment. I downed the shot in one motion, feeling the burn trace a line of fire down my throat. I chased it with a long pull of beer, letting the coldness wash away the heat. My phone sat on the bar in front of me, screen dark, but I could feel it, could sense the vibrations that would start any second now, the desperate attempts to reach me that would go unanswered. 11:45. Right now, inside that facility, the lights would be flickering. Not dramatically, just subtle variations that the workers would notice. The men on the floor, people like Big Tom and Martinez and Williams, they'd feel it in their bones. The rhythm of the machinery would shift, the smooth hum degrading into something irregular, concerning. Someone would be running to the control room, shouting questions that Sarah couldn't answer. 11:50. The alarms would be starting now. Yellow warnings first, flashing on screens that Sarah was frantically trying to understand. Voltage instability detected. Phase synchronization failure. Harmonic resonance approaching critical thresholds. She'd be clicking through menus, searching for the override commands, the emergency protocols, but those protocols were in my head, not in any manual she could access. "Where's Rachel?" Someone would be screaming. Maybe Martinez. He never trusted the computers, always said they were too stupid to run something this complicated. And right now, he'd be proven absolutely right. 11:55. Marcus would still be in his office, or maybe in that conference room, explaining to the board how much money he'd just saved by eliminating expensive overhead. He wouldn't hear the alarms. The administrative building was too well insulated, too far removed from the actual work. He'd be completely oblivious while his empire started collapsing. My phone erupted to life despite being powered off. Wait, no, I'd turned it back on at some point. Must have been muscle memory, some part of my brain still tied to that facility, still monitoring, still caring despite everything. The screen lit up with notification after notification. Missed calls from Sarah, from the facility emergency line, from numbers I didn't recognize. Text messages flooding in, their desperate tone visible even in the preview text. "Rachel, voltage is crashing. What's the override code? Rachel, please call. Emergency situation. Rachel, the system is failing. We need you." And then, finally, from Marcus himself, "Call immediately. Legal action will be pursued." I laughed. It was a cold sound, empty of humor. Legal action. The man was watching his inheritance die, and he was threatening lawsuits. I signaled Martha for another round. "Your boyfriend's pretty persistent," Martha observed, nodding at my buzzing phone.
Exemplar, y corrected.
"And he's only calling because he needs something. Typical." "Amen to that," Martha said, refilling my glass. Noon. High noon, like an Old West showdown. The monitoring cycle would be complete now. The automated systems would have detected the grid fluctuations, compared them against their rigid parameters, and made their decision. The main breakers would trip. The facility would go dark. All that industrial power, all that electricity that kept the furnaces burning and the metal flowing, would simply stop. And then the real countdown would begin. The furnaces, massive vessels containing molten steel at temperatures exceeding 1800 degrees, would start to cool. At first, it wouldn't be obvious. The thermal mass was enormous. But without the constant electrical current maintaining that heat, physics would take over. 12 minutes until the temperature dropped below critical thresholds. 20 minutes until the surface started to solidify. 2 hours until the entire contents froze into an unusable mass. My phone continued its desperate dance across the bar. I watched it like I was observing some fascinating scientific experiment. 23 missed calls. 31. 46. The desperation was escalating, metastasizing into full-blown panic. Then the television in the corner of the bar, usually tuned to sports or weather, suddenly cut to a news bulletin. Breaking news: emergency response at Titan Steel Works in Groveport. Multiple fire trucks on scene. Officials report a possible industrial incident. We'll bring you updates as they become available. The camera showed aerial footage from a news helicopter. Titan Steel Works, my facility, my life's work, was visible from above. Black smoke was pouring from several buildings, not the normal white steam but thick, dark clouds that looked apocalyptic. That wasn't smoke from a fire. That was the emergency venting system, releasing toxic gases as the chemical processes inside the furnaces destabilized without proper power regulation. Looks bad, Martha commented, glancing at the screen. Looks expensive, I replied, raising my glass toward the television. Here's to learning lessons the hard way. The phone finally stopped ringing. That silence was somehow worse than the constant buzzing, because it meant they'd given up trying to reach me directly and had moved to some other strategy. Probably trying to find me in person, sending security to my house, dispatching people to everywhere I might be. But Murphy's Tavern wasn't the kind of place anyone would look. It was anonymous, forgettable, perfect. 12:30. A black Mercedes pulled into the gravel parking lot so fast it sprayed rocks against the bar's front window. I watched through the grimy glass as the door opened and a man in a polo shirt and khakis practically fell out, looking around desperately. Richard Whitmore, Marcus's father. The actual founder, the man who'd built Titan Steel from nothing, who'd recently retired to let his son run things. He looked like he'd been pulled out of his beach house retirement and thrown into a nightmare. He spotted me through the window. Our eyes met, and I saw the recognition, the relief, the desperate hope in his face. He burst through the door, letting in a blast of sunshine and hot air. "Rachel," he gasped, out of breath, looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. "Thank God. You have to come back. Please. The facility is shutting down. The furnaces are cooling. We have maybe 20 minutes before everything solidifies." I took a slow sip of my beer. "That sounds like a management problem, Richard." "Management problem?" He looked like I'd slapped him. "Rachel, this isn't about management. This is about 500 jobs. About people's livelihoods. About families. Should have thought about that before you let your son fire me," I said coldly. "I didn't," he stopped, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Marcus made that decision. I was in South Carolina. I didn't know until he called me an hour ago, panicking." "Where is Marcus?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. "Suspended. Pending investigation. Removed from operations entirely." Richard pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "Rachel, I'm prepared to offer you anything. Name your price. Name your terms. Just please get in my car and save those furnaces." I studied him. Richard was a good man, always had been. He'd built something real, employed generations of families, treated his workers with dignity. His only mistake had been assuming his son had inherited anything beyond his DNA. "I want it in writing," I said finally. "Independent contractor status. Triple my previous salary. 5-year contract with full operational authority. No consultants in my control room. No efficiency experts questioning my decisions. I run the electrical systems my way, or I don't run them at all." Done, Richard said immediately. I'll have legal draft it right now. Not good enough. I want it emailed to my personal account before I leave this barstool. Richard's fingers flew across his phone screen, typing with the desperation of a man watching his legacy dissolve. Sending it now. Legal, emergency contract, Rachel Moore, send it to her email immediately. I don't care if you have to wake up the CEO. Do it now. My phone chimed. I picked it up, opened the email. The contract was sloppy, rushed, probably wouldn't hold up to serious legal scrutiny under normal circumstances. But the terms were there. $250 per hour. 5-year minimum. Complete operational independence. I could live with that. One more thing, I said, looking up from the screen. Anything, Richard promised. I want Marcus to meet me at the gate. I want him to escort me personally to the control room. And I want him to apologize. Out loud. Where everyone can hear it. Richard's face showed pain, the agony of a father forced to humiliate his son. But he nodded. He'll do it. I'll make sure of it. Please, Rachel. We're out of time. I stood up, left $40 on the bar for Martha, and followed Richard out into the parking lot. His Mercedes still had the engine running, the air conditioning blasting. He drove like a man possessed, running red lights, weaving through traffic, while simultaneously on the phone coordinating with people at the facility. When we pulled up to the main gate of Titan Steelworks, the scene was chaos. Fire trucks, ambulances, workers standing around in confused clusters, smoke billowing from multiple buildings. And there, standing by the security checkpoint, looking like he'd been thoroughly destroyed and then hastily reassembled, was Marcus. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His perfect hair was disheveled. His eyes were red, either from smoke or crying, maybe both. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 2 hours. I got out of the Mercedes slowly, deliberately. I walked up to the gate and waited. Didn't open it. Didn't say a word. Just stood there, making him come to me. Marcus stumbled forward, reached the security keypad with shaking hands, entered the code. The gate began to slide open with its familiar mechanical grind. I'm sorry, Rachel, he mumbled, looking at the ground. Can't hear you over the sound of $30 million melting, I said, cupping my hand to my ear. You'll need to speak up. I'm sorry, he shouted, his voice cracking. I was wrong. You were right about everything. Please just fix it. Save the facility. The workers gathered behind the fence had stopped talking. They were all watching this moment, this public humiliation, this complete reversal of power. I saw Williams giving me a subtle thumbs up. Martinez was grinning openly. All right, I said, pushing past Marcus without another glance. Let's go save your daddy's company. I walked toward the main control building with purpose, but without panic. I knew exactly how much time I had left. Physics doesn't care about drama or politics. The numbers were simple, brutal, unforgiving. 14 minutes until the point of no return. The facility interior was like something from a nightmare. The normal deafening roar of production had been replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the hiss of pressure valves and the panicked voices of men who knew their jobs were hanging in the balance. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow shadows. The temperature was rising without the cooling systems running at full capacity. I found Sarah in the main control room, her face streaked with tears, staring at screens full of red warning indicators like they were alien hieroglyphics. The consultants Marcus had hired were huddled in a corner, useless, staring at their tablets like they might suddenly reveal magical solutions. Move, I said quietly. The authority in my voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Sarah practically jumped out of the chair. Rachel, I tried everything. I tried all the protocols, but nothing's working. The system is locked. I couldn't. I know, I interrupted gently. This isn't your fault. I designed this to happen. Her eyes went wide. You what? Later. Right now, I need you to go to the breaker panel in the back. When I say Mark, you're going to manually prime the spring on breaker 7.
Can you do that?
Yes, she said, wiping her face. I can do that. I slid into my chair. It was still warm from Sarah's body heat. The screens showed a catastrophe in progress. Zone 1, critical failure. Zone 2, voltage collapse. Zone 3, disconnected. Main bus voltage, 0. The backup generators were running, trying to provide power, but they couldn't connect to the facility's systems because the phase synchronization was completely wrong. Marcus, I said without turning around. He'd followed me in like a beaten dog. Get me coffee.
Black.
2 sugars. Are you serious? He sputtered. The facility is dying. And I'm dehydrated. If I pass out, everyone loses.
Get the coffee. Now.
I heard his footsteps retreat. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. I cracked my knuckles and got to work. First, I had to stop the error cascade. I opened the command line interface that the consultants probably didn't even know existed. Typed commands from memory, killing processes, resetting safety limits, forcing the systems to stop trying to protect themselves from a threat that no longer existed. The screens went black. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd miscalculated, pushed too hard, broken something irreparable. Then they flickered back to life, stable but empty. The cascade had stopped. The systems were waiting for instructions. Now came the dangerous part. I needed to manually synchronize the backup generators to the main power bus. It was like trying to jump onto a spinning carousel, timing everything perfectly or risking catastrophic damage to millions of dollars worth of equipment. Sarah Mark, I shouted. From the back of the room, I heard the mechanical clunk of the breaker being primed. The sound was beautiful, mechanical, real. I pulled up the phase monitor. 2 waveforms appeared, sine waves dancing across the screen. The generator's output. The dead bus waiting to be energized. I needed to bring them into perfect alignment, match their frequencies exactly, 60 Hz, not 59.9, not 60.1, exactly 60. My fingers danced across the keyboard, adjusting parameters, bypassing safety limits, overriding warnings that screamed about potential damage. The waveforms started to converge, sliding toward each other like dancers finding rhythm. Marcus returned with coffee. I grabbed it without looking, took a sip. It was terrible.
Perfect.
Everyone hold on to something, I said calmly. This is either going to work perfectly or destroy what's left of the electrical system. Either way, it's going to be dramatic. I watched the numbers. 59.8. 59.9. The waveforms were almost touching, almost aligned. My finger hovered over the enter key. 60.0. I pressed enter. For a moment, nothing happened. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, from deep within the facility, came a sound like thunder.
Chunk.
The main breaker closing, connecting the backup generators to the facility's power distribution system. The sound was so loud it rattled the windows. The lights in the control room surged bright, dimmed, then steadied. The screens flickered and stabilized. The hum, that beautiful, familiar hum that had been my constant companion for 20 years, began to build. Low at first, a growl rising from the floor, then growing into that tooth-rattling vibration I knew better than my own heartbeat. Power had been restored. The facility was alive again. But that didn't mean we'd won. I immediately pulled up the furnace temperature readings, my heart pounding. The numbers were bad. 828 degrees. The critical freezing point was 820. We were 8 degrees away from total failure. Full power to all heating elements, I commanded, typing furiously. Override efficiency protocols. Ignore the safety warnings about overcurrent. I need heat, I need it now, and I don't care how much electricity it takes. The warning alarm started screaming again, but this time I was the one causing them. I was pushing the systems past their normal operational limits, forcing every available volt into those furnaces, trying to reverse the cooling before physics made the decision final. The temperature graph appeared on the main screen. A flat line at 828 degrees. It hung there, stubborn, refusing to move. I'd restored power, but the thermal mass of that much steel was enormous. It took time to heat up, time we might not have. Why isn't it rising? Marcus demanded, hovering behind me. Because thermodynamics doesn't care about your quarterly earnings, I snapped. Heat moves when it's ready, not when you demand it. I stared at the screen, willing the numbers to change. 828. 827. It was dropping. We were losing the battle. Then, 828. 829. 830. The line began to curve upward. Slowly, painfully slowly, but upward. The heating elements were winning. We were reversing the cooling. My phone buzzed. A text from Williams on the floor. Crust is breaking. Metal is flowing.
No ruptures.
You saved us, boss. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands, which had been rock steady through the entire crisis, suddenly felt shaky. We're stable, I announced to the room. Furnaces are heating back to operational temperature. Crisis averted. The room erupted in cheers. Sarah hugged me from behind. One of the consultants actually started crying. Richard, who'd been standing silently in the corner the entire time, slumped against the wall in relief. I stood up slowly, every joint in my body protesting. 20 years of this work had taken its toll, and I felt every minute of it. Marcus, I said, turning to face him. He looked broken, destroyed, completely stripped of his arrogance. Get out of my control room. He opened his mouth to say something, looked at his father, who gave him a sharp nod toward the door and walked out. I watched him go, and surprisingly, I didn't feel satisfaction. Just necessity, like taking out the trash. Richard, I addressed the older man. I need 2 hours to complete the stabilization sequence. Then I'm going home. I expect that contract countersigned and in my inbox by morning. It will be, Richard promised. And Rachel?
Thank you. Truly.
You saved more than just the facility today. Don't thank me, I said, turning back to my monitors. Just pay me. And keep your son away from anything that matters. By 4 p.m, the facility was back to its normal, deafening rhythm. The crisis had passed. The furnaces were glowing hot. The metal was flowing. Production had resumed. The workers had returned to their stations, moving with renewed confidence. The fear of unemployment temporarily vanished. I walked the floor one last time, needing to see it with my own eyes. The furnace bays stretched out before me, massive vessels glowing with internal heat. The men working there stopped when they saw me. Big Tom started it, banging his wrench against the metal railing in a steady rhythm. Then Martinez joined, then Williams, then the crane operator hit the horn. It wasn't a cheer. It was better.
It was respect.
Recognition. The sound that says, "You're one of us. You're essential. You saved us." I didn't wave. I just nodded. Let them know I understood. How's the metal running, Tom?
I asked.
Smooth as butter, boss, he grinned, showing teeth against his soot-covered face. Lost maybe 3 pots at the far end, but 97 are perfect. You saved our asses. Word is Marcus got kicked upstairs, Martinez added. Heard he's director of special projects now. Know what that means? Means he gets to pick out the donuts and stay away from anything important, I said. Exactly where he belongs. I continued my walk, touching the equipment, listening to the hum, feeling the vibration through my boots. This was my kingdom. Not because I owned it, but because I understood it. Every scar, every quirk, every dangerous secret. In the break room, someone had taped a picture over Marcus's face on the safety poster. It was Danny DeVito. The caption read, "So anyway, I started optimizing the budget into a crater." I laughed.
Real laughter this time.
The tension that had been coiled in my chest for weeks finally released. I returned to the auxiliary power station one last time. Unlocked the door with my brass key that Marcus had forgotten to demand back. Inside, the red light on the autosync override switch was still glowing. I reached out and flipped it back to manual. The light turned green. The system was safe again. Not because of automation, but because I was watching over it. "You're welcome," I whispered to the machine. 3 weeks later, the dust has settled into a new configuration. My contract is framed on my office wall, right next to a calendar featuring exclusively Danny DeVito memes, a gift from the crew. I'm making triple my old salary. I arrive at 9, leave at 3, and nobody questions it. I've earned that privilege in blood, sweat, and prevented catastrophes. Marcus still works here, technically. He has an office in the basement of the administrative building, what used to be a record storage room. His title is Director of Strategic Vision, which means absolutely nothing. I heard he's starting a podcast about resilient leadership. I subscribed just so I could leave a 1-star review. The consultants were escorted out the day after the blackout. Their cloud solution turned out to be a white-labeled generic monitoring system that wasn't even rated for our voltage levels. Richard personally walked them to their cars. I'm sitting in my control room right now. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. The grid is stable. The hum is perfect. Sarah brings me coffee without being asked. She's learning the systems, understanding the nuances, becoming the engineer this place will need when I eventually retire. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty about what I did, about the risk, about those terrifying minutes when the facility hung on the edge of complete failure. I light a cigarette, metaphorically, since I can't smoke in here anymore, and I tell them the truth. Risk is relative. You want to talk about risk? The real risk was letting someone who didn't understand the consequences make decisions about life and death systems. I didn't create the danger. I just removed the safety net to show everyone how high up we really were. Sometimes you have to let people fall far enough to understand why they needed you in the first place. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of expertise is to let them experience the cost of ignorance. Marcus learned. Richard learned. The whole company learned. And me? I learned that loyalty without respect is just exploitation. That you can't optimize expertise into obsolescence. That the people who keep the lights on deserve more than a spreadsheet analysis of their worth. The facility is humming. The workers are safe. The metal is flowing. And I'm sitting here with my feet on the console, watching the voltage graphs stay perfectly level, exactly where they should be. I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. I'm just a mechanic who knows how to read the manual, who understands that some jobs can't be done by algorithms, who proved that experience isn't folklore. It's survival. Marcus wanted efficiency. He got it. Just not the way he expected. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a facility to run. The right way. My way. The only way that actually works. Thanks for sticking around, rebels. Hit that subscribe button because karma is a beautiful thing when you know how to engineer it properly.